Welcome to a place between waking and dream, where gods rise, empires fall, and legends are remembered in whispers. Light the fire, let the story begin. In the final book of ancient scripture, there's a scroll said to hold the fate of the world, sealed 7 times, each seal a warning, a lock against the end. And when the first seal breaks, the world doesn't burn, it doesn't scream, it holds its breath. And through the silence, a rider steps forward, a white horse, a bow in hand, a crown set high. Some call him Conquest, others the Antichrist. But names don't matter. What matters is what follows. He arrives with peace in his voice and ambition in his bones. He is the lie that wins hearts before swords, the calm before the collapse, the spark dressed as salvation. The first sound was not thunder. It was quieter, like breath caught in a room just before it breaks. And then the seal cracked. A rider emerged, cloaked in white, not pure, not peaceful, but polished. A crown rested on his head, not won, but given. He carried a bow, but held no arrows. This was Conquest, the first of 4, the beginning of the end. He does not need to shout. He does not burn cities. He does not scream at the gates. He simply rides, and nations bend. In every era, he has worn a different face. In the ancient world, he was Caesar, carving empire across Europe and Africa. In holy wars, he wore a cross and drew blood in the name of salvation. In the modern age, he appears in suits and screens, rewriting borders with contracts, dissolving nations with currency. He is not war, he comes before war. He is the handshake before the betrayal, the banner raised with false hope, the crown placed gently, just before the sword drops. Those who see him often cheer, at first, because Conquest doesn't take, he's invited in. He doesn't destroy with fire, he claims a land, a people, a future. His bow glows, but never fires, because the threat is enough. Power lies in suggestion, in the weight of silence that comes before 1,000 footsteps. Behind him, the world shifts, maps are redrawn, thrones are emptied. The first step in the fall is always quiet, and somewhere, as his white horse vanishes into dust, another hoof hits the ground, louder, heavier, red. Conquest opens the door, war walks through it. The second seal broke like a bone snapping under pressure. No whisper this time, only the clang of iron and the roar of flame. From the wound in the world came the second rider, war. He did not need introduction. The earth knew his name. His horse was red, not painted, but soaked. Its hooves dripped blood that had no time to dry. And in the rider's hand, a great sword, not elegant, not ceremonial, a weapon meant to tear. Where Conquest deceives, war declares. He is not subtle, he is not quiet. He is the scream in the trenches, the smoke over cities, the torch to the kindling. He rides into lands already weakened, softened by promises and crowns, and he finishes what diplomacy began. You know him. You've seen him in the flash of bombs, in flags torn from buildings, in sons sent marching and mothers left weeping. He rides not alone, but with the roar of nations behind him, each convinced their sword is righteous. And he never stops, not for truth, not for peace, not even for victory. War does not care who is right, only who is left. And when he moves on, he leaves nothing. No rule, no reason, no recovery, only silence and smoke and hunger. Because where war rides, famine follows. Famine came without banners. No storm announced his arrival, no clash of iron, no cries from conquered cities. He simply appeared, on a pale horse, skin stretched thin over bone, eyes sunken as if hollowed by centuries of hunger. The ground beneath him cracked, not from rage, but from neglect. Crops withered before they could bloom. Wheat fields became wastelands. Vineyards turned to ash beneath a sky that gave no rain. In the marketplace, food grew scarce, then priceless, then myth. People traded silver for stale bread. Mothers fed children before themselves, until they couldn't feed anyone at all. The sick and starving lined the streets, not fallen in battle, but slowly unraveling from within. There were no glorious deaths, only quiet decay. And still, famine rode on. He didn't need to speak. His presence spread like rot, slow, invisible, unstoppable. Where war shattered cities in a day, famine ruined them over months. The gods didn't fear his power, they feared his patience. He carried no sword, no flame, only scales, a symbol not of justice, but of imbalance, a world tipped too far in favor of greed, a warning that no empire, no system, no civilization can endure if its people starve. And so, famine did not conquer. He waited, and the world fell to its knees, one empty stomach at a time. He did not gallop. He did not charge. He simply arrived. While conquest set the wheels of power in motion, while war drenched the earth in steel, while famine hollowed the world from the inside, death waited. And when the last cry was swallowed by silence, he stepped forward. His horse was pale, not the pale of sickness, but of sun-bleached bone. A steed cloaked in shadows, its hooves barely touching the ground. Where it passed, even the wind held its breath. Death was no frail figure in rags. He wore armor wrought of midnight steel, etched with runes lost to the first breath of time. A scythe hung across his back, tall as a man, the blade curved like the crescent moon before the harvest. His helm bore no crown, only a visor carved like a skull, eternal and unmoving. He did not speak. He did not need to. The world recognized him without introduction. His presence was not felt. It was known. Like the last note in a song, like the cold that settles just before dawn. Where conquest made kings, war made martyrs, and famine made graves, death made peace. Not in mercy, in finality. He did not kill. That was done by others. He only collected. From battlefield to throne room, from nursery to deathbed, he passed through all without judgment, without hesitation. No plea ever moved him, no sin ever swayed him. He came when it was time, and not a moment before. To the righteous he brought release, to the wicked reckoning. He rode through ash and dust, across crumbling cities and forgotten tombs. The others came and went, but death remained, unchanged, unquestioned, undeterred. Some feared him, some worshipped him, but none could avoid him, because unlike conquest, who sought control, unlike war, who demanded struggle, unlike famine, who fed on absence, death needed nothing. He did not hunger, he did not hate, he simply fulfilled the promise that life made the moment it began. And so, when the final seal broke and the last door opened, he did not rise with fury. He stepped forward with certainty, because in the end, every road ends at his feet, not in chaos, not in fire, but in quiet. He was not the end of the world. He was the one who closed the door behind it. Before the first seal broke, before hooves struck soil and the sky turned, they gathered, not in light, not in fire, but in the silence before consequence. 4 riders, 4 faces of the end. They didn't speak often. But now, before they were unleashed upon the world, they stood together, not as monsters, not as villains, but as inevitabilities. Conquest was the first to step forward. Cloaked in confidence, his armor gleamed with ambition and unfinished empires. His voice was sharp but steady. "They always reach too far," he said. "They raise cities from nothing and assume they've conquered death. I don't bring chaos. I bring the reminder, everything gained is still temporary." War stood beside him, broad shoulders bearing scars from 1,000 forgotten fields. His blade rested in the ground, not raised. "I don't choose sides," he said. "They call me when peace becomes a story they tell children. I don't start their wars. I end them." Famine leaned against his pale horse, quiet, withdrawn. His voice was a breath barely heard, yet impossible to ignore. "They build for plenty," he said, "then strip it bare with greed. I follow their harvests when they've turned fields into currency. I walk in the places they've already emptied." Death was last, still, unblinking. He looked at them all without judgment. "They blame me for the end," he said, "but I was always with them. Every breath carries my name, even if they don't speak it. I don't punish. I keep the balance." There were no arguments, no orders, no triumph. Each of them knew what they were. Each of them knew why they had to ride. This was not a meeting of rage or vengeance. This was the final moment of calm. 4 riders, each one carrying the weight of what happens when the world forgets its limits. When they rode next, the world would change, not because they wished it, but because it had been promised, and none of them break a promise. The horsemen didn't just ride once and disappear. Their presence lingered, not as myths, but as patterns, events, and consequences etched into human history. War left more behind than battles. He shaped the borders of nations, drove revolutions, and turned fields into graveyards. Statues of generals, victory arches, and the ruins of once great cities all speak his name. Even today, every military parade and every war memorial carries the echo of his footsteps. Famine left less to see, but more to feel. He marked time in empty grain stores, in stories passed down about ration lines, and in governments that rose and fell based on the promise of bread. Recipes from lean years, traditions built around scarcity, they're all quiet reminders of what happens when the world stops feeding itself. Pestilence erased entire cities. You can still see his mark in ancient texts describing plagues, in mass graves hidden beneath modern streets, and in the way societies learned to fear strangers overnight. He changed how we live, how we gather, how we isolate, how we heal. And death? Death left a global footprint. Graveyards, crypts, tombs, these are his architecture. But his influence goes further. In the way we mourn, the way we remember, even the way we speak about loss, he's there, present but not loud, unavoidable but not always seen. The horsemen became part of the world, not because they lingered above it, but because we built around their passing. They're not riding in some far-off future. They've been here the whole time, woven into everything we fear, prepare for, and try to survive. And whether we realize it or not, we've been living in their shadow ever since. It began not with thunder, but with silence. A stillness so absolute, even the stars seemed to hold their breath. And then, the first seal cracked. In the heavens, scrolls unrolled by unseen hands, not inked by quill, but carved by fate. Each seal a binding, a law upon the end of all things. And as they broke, one by one, the world shifted. The first seal unleashed conquest, crowned and cold, riding to twist power into oppression. The second tore through peace, and war followed, red blade raised high, eager for flame. The third whispered hunger, and famine stepped through the cracks in harvest and heart. The fourth was the silence that followed all cries. Death, last of the four, did not ride in haste, he simply arrived. Each seal did not summon chaos, it revealed it. It loosed what had always waited, just beneath the skin of the world. As the horsemen rode, empires crumbled in days. Faith shattered, skies wept ash, mountains split, oceans turned to dust. Men prayed for wrath, begged for mercy, and found only consequence. And above it all, no God answered. Because this was not the work of gods. This was the contract, the design, the fulfillment of the final promise. The horsemen were not rebels. They were executors. They did not decide the fate of the world. They enforced it. As the horsemen rode across the earth, the heavens did not sleep. Above the ash-choked skies and shattered kingdoms, watchers stirred. Not mortals, not gods, something older. Beings cloaked in radiant fire and stormlight, eyes like distant stars, wings that cast no shadow. They stood upon the edge of creation, not to intervene, but to weigh. Because the apocalypse was not a tantrum, it was a scale, a measurement of all that humanity had become. And so the celestial hosts watched. They counted every broken oath, every drop of innocent blood, every tyrant left unchallenged, every truth buried for convenience. They did not cry out against the horsemen. They knew the seals. They understood the contract. But still, they grieved. Because this was not vengeance, it was debt collection. And they knew no judgment comes without a price. Some angels descended, not with swords but with sorrow. They walked among the ruins, not to save but to witness, to guide those few who still chose mercy over madness, to whisper hope, not as a promise, but as a test. They were not here to stop the horsemen. They were here to see who stood tall as the world fell. Because even in the end, heaven did not offer rescue, only reflection. The horsemen rode, and the sky, heavy with judgment, held its breath. The fourth rider vanished, and for a moment, the world stood still. No more galloping hooves, no more screams carried on the wind, just silence, as if the planet itself had stopped breathing. But it wasn't over, because something had changed. The horsemen didn't just destroy cities or harvest souls. They broke the rules, shattered the balance that held everything together. And when that balance failed, something new was born. They didn't write about this part in the scrolls. It wasn't prophecy. It wasn't divine. It wasn't even sent. It was summoned. By fear, by collapse, by humanity itself. Some call it the fifth wind, not a rider, but a consequence. A chain reaction of chaos, spreading through everything the horsemen left behind. Nations turned on themselves. Armies split into war bands with no leaders. Food riots became executions. Disease spread like fire in dry grass. Families locked their doors against each other. And people stopped believing. In governments, in gods, in each other. The fifth wind didn't have a name, but it didn't need one. You knew it when it arrived. Not with a flash of lightning, but with your neighbor banging on your door, screaming for food. Not with a fiery horse, but with a cold look from someone who used to be your friend. The horseman cracked the world open. The fifth wind is what leaked out. And somewhere far beneath the noise, Something old was stirring, something waiting for that final seal to fall. Because the end wasn't an explosion, it wasn't even a war, it was a slow unraveling, and the final thread was about to snap. The horsemen were not creators. They didn't build cities, they didn't pass laws. They moved through the world like wildfires, fast, final, and without apology. And when they passed, what was left wasn't a world, it was the bones of one. The cities fell first, not with explosions but with silence. No one rebuilt, no one could. The roads were empty. No caravans, no kings, no coin. The temples crumbled next. The gods didn't answer, or maybe they never had. What good were prayers when death stood at your door? In the ashes of empire, survivors stopped speaking in terms of nations. Borders didn't matter anymore. Only firewood, only shelter, only how much clean water was left. The world didn't burn in one glorious moment. It decayed. A merchant turned scavenger picks through rusted armor. A queen who once ruled armies now wraps her child in torn banners. A man guards a door that no one has knocked on in years. These aren't dramatic endings. They're slow, quiet ones. Because when the horsemen ride, there are no speeches, no grand battles, just the long unraveling of everything that used to feel permanent. And somewhere in that wasteland, there are those who whisper, will they return? No one says it out loud, because they're not sure if they're hoping for it or dreading it. There was no thunder when the final seal broke. No fire, no flash, just silence. The kind of silence that settles after a decision has been made. The sky no longer wept. The earth no longer groaned. The world had already been brought low. Cities had crumbled into their foundations. Oceans crept inland and stayed. The horsemen had ridden, and nothing was left to stop them. But the seventh seal, it was never about destruction. It was about what came after. The scroll, the ancient celestial scroll sealed in heaven, was opened in full. And with it, something shifted. Not in the sky, not in the ground, but in people. The last survivors did not scream anymore. They didn't run. They simply looked up, as if waiting for something they couldn't describe. There were no more armies, no more governments, no more names that mattered. What came through the final seal wasn't a beast or a plague. It was judgment, pure, unfiltered, quiet. Not the kind of judgment that punishes, the kind that reveals. The horsemen had done their part. Conquest had shattered pride. War had fed on ambition. Famine had shown the cost of indulgence. Death had swept away the illusion of control. And now, with the last seal broken, humanity stood face to face with itself, naked, remembered, accountable. The world didn't end in a bang, it ended in a mirror. The final seal didn't announce doom. It asked a question. What will you be, now that there's nothing left to hide behind? In the distance, the horsemen vanished, their purpose complete, and in the stillness that followed, something else began. Not a new kingdom, not a second chance, just a breath, the first breath in a world that had finally stopped lying to itself. Not everyone who brings ruin rides a pale horse, and not every shadow is cast by something divine. Throughout history, there have been those who wore the symbols of judgment, who claimed the mantle of gods, not to uphold balance, but to gain power. These are the false riders. They raise banners in the name of conquest, not to unite, but to dominate. They preach war as a path to glory, masking bloodshed as righteousness. They let hunger fester, not as punishment, but as control. They twist fear into obedience, spread disease through neglect, and call it fate. And when the consequences come, they blame prophecy. Unlike the true horsemen, the false riders aren't inevitable. They are chosen, made, built by ego, by greed, by ambition. A tyrant declares himself a savior. A general burns a nation to claim a title. A cult leader predicts the end and watches his followers fall apart under the weight of belief. They mimic the myth, but they lack the purpose. The real horsemen don't come for attention. They don't want thrones or followers. They are forces meant to balance, not rule. The false riders, they want thrones made of bones. They want to be feared, remembered, obeyed, but they carry no seal, no divine mark, just borrowed dread wrapped in self-interest. And their damage can be worse, because when people fear the myth, they miss the manipulator. And when they believe the lie, they help build the kingdom of the false rider themselves. So yes, there are 4 horsemen, but there have always been more who only pretend to be. They came not to destroy, but to remind that every empire is borrowed time, that peace is fragile, that life, in all its brilliance, walks beside its shadows. The 4 horsemen are not just prophecy, they are reflection. And as we look into their myths, we are really looking into ourselves. If you've stayed with me until now, thank you. This story was just one echo among many, and there are more. If you'd like to hear them, consider subscribing. Until next time, stay curious, stay listening, and remember, even silence tells a story.